All right. Good morning, everyone. It's the Helm developer call for October 22nd, 2020. So for anyone who's not been here before, how the format goes is that we start with any announcements that were on from the last week, discussion items that are on the agenda, and then we have assignments for the next meeting as well. It doesn't look like we have any announcements for this week, so I think we can just jump straight into discussion items. So the first one on the minutes for today is Matt Farina, you have a point about discussing Helm version 3.4 and the 2.17 timelines. Do you want to expound about that today?
Sure, I didn't add it, but I'll totally happily talk about it. Um, so 217 and 3.4 RC1s are out. The plan right now is to release them on Monday. I know that's not our usual day, but the sooner the better. So that's the plan, because we have had no issues, no comments, no nothing about any problems with it. I've tried it, I've used it, I haven't run into any problems. I ask other people here to do that too. The big changes in this that'll be noticed in the notes are obviously the charts repositories moving to the new location, and the default location for Tiller is now GHCR, although Tiller is available in GCR, Quay, and Docker Hub. It's going everywhere because with everybody pruning things and life cycles, we're not exactly sure what's going to happen. So it's all over the place, but GHCR is the new default location too, because we control it as a Helm project. It's right off of, for those with access, github.com/Helm, there's a packages tab. And if you go there, you'll see Tiller and you can manage it. All of the orgs, I think now in GitHub have access to this kind of thing. So those are the two big changes. Yes, did I see a hand mark?
Yeah, just I've been trying to read between the lines, or I'm misunderstanding, or what's the vision now that GitHub, so I read the announcement, the blog, it was great, but are we keeping this stable or are we not?
So we're going to get to that in just a minute. That's Vic's item.
Is the question of the day.
Right now, the current
that's
plan of record is that the charts repository on November 13th becomes an archive, right? And so this is all about carrying the availability of people being able to access that archive past November 13th. That's what the new charts repository. We'll have a blog post that goes out Monday that tells you, it'll remind you of the timeline. It'll tell you about moving things around. And if you're using Helm version 3 or Helm version 2, it'll give you actionable steps, including if you're not upgrading to 3.4 or 2.17 right away, things that you can do immediately. It's all actionable steps and a reminder of timeline type information. That'll go out Monday along with the release.
Yeah, Matt, I think it'd be good, yeah, when that goes out, because that question came up last night at the workshop. So right in the middle of it in a demo. So yeah, there is quite a lot of questions out there, and probably all going full circle and go out in one piece of post or whatever would be great.
Yeah, and this brings up another issue I'll add to the end of how do we communicate to the long tail, the people who aren't in the community, but I'll punt that till later. That's all I had on 3.4 and 2.17. I'll cut them on Monday, barring something that stops it. Please take it for a spin. And with that, I think it hands back to you for sure to hand off to the next issue.
Perfect. Yeah, we can continue this conversation in a quick moment when we, I just want to get through the smaller discussion items so we don't have those tail off, and then we can revisit this one, your specific discussion item, Vic. But first, Mark, you had a question about the criteria to accept a Dependabot PR.
Yeah, basically, I'm working on with Cobra, and so there's a new release, and I know that the Cobra changes are safe, but we had an issue with the 1.1 release, which brought in dependencies which would be unsafe. So they did an emergency or a fix 1.1.1, but now in my mind, I was unsure how to check for Helm if dependencies brought in by another, sub dependencies, are they safe? Are they not? What's the criteria? The test passing, is that good enough?
In the most part, it's been test passing, acceptance test passing. There have been dependencies in the past that we're aware of that have been a little bit more fragile when it comes to things. So we do a little bit more due diligence when it comes to updating certain dependencies. The first thing, obviously, that comes to mind is Kubernetes. But there are other things like Mergo that has broken things here and there. So there's a little bit of due diligence and kind of like looking at the changes to see if there is any significant things. But if the tests are passing, the acceptance test suite is passing, then for the most part, they're relatively safe to go ahead and merge. So it's just more of like keeping ahead of the curve. If there is a little bit, if you're aware of breaking changes in a particular release, then it's worth taking some due diligence to see what's the impact. But otherwise, yeah, tests and make sure it's okay.
In this particular case, 3.4 just branched, so I think even if we merged it and there were surprises, we have lots of time to adjust.
Right, exactly. And that's where the release candidate stage really comes in to help catch those things.
The other thing I would look at with this, because you pointed out it brought in some new dependencies, whole new dependencies, not just new versions of dependencies. And we should make sure that the license is acceptable, or if it's ones that are already allowed, we should do an audit of, who are these dependencies and licenses, and where are they coming from? Are they okay to use? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and the only case where that's been a problem before has been like a Facebook library, because they had their specific BSD plus clause licensing. If it's Apache, MIT, some of the open source ones, then they're pretty much okay to go.
Okay, I'll have a check for the new ones. I hadn't thought of that at all.
Yeah, and that's just one of those simple things. Anytime we have an update, I'm looking through and I don't see, there are a bunch of new dependencies. I'll say that.
Yeah, Viper brings in a whole bunch of stuff.
It does. And so far, it looks like everything's either MIT, BSD, something like that. So for the most part, they do appear to be okay. I haven't gone through them all, but I'll help you with that.
Thank you, Matt. Okay.
Oh, one quick question. For Dependabot, it still is going to require 2 maintainers because it's an outside thing to review it, right?
Yeah, I don't think we made any stipulation or special cases for it. It's not a core, Dependabot's not a core maintainer, so that should fall under the 2 LGTM policy, unless it's an extra small.
I don't know. It's moving its way into the community, and it's one of these days it's going to merge all around it, I reckon. That's just conspiracy.
Mark, so you have the second one here, which is on HIP 2. So you wanted to talk about the release dates for, or moving forward?
What's more the implications of it? So now that 3.4 has branched and 2.17 has branched, once they're out, technically we were moving towards announcing the next release. And that would be, according to the HIP 2, January 13th, 2021. So before it's announced, I want to bring it up to you guys to see if that's still comfortable. And the other implication is that we'd have monthly patch releases. So also, are we ready to commit to that, or do we want to delay?
When I was organizing the 3.4 release and we were moving things around, I created the milestone for 3.5 and 3.4.1, and I actually attached those dates to those releases. So I was figuring we were going to do it because it was good. And then we'll have to merge the stuff on Helm dub. We'll note it in the release notes, things like that this time when the next releases are coming out. I was expecting to, and I've already started noting it. And I talked to somebody the other day. We probably need to create a calendar that has those dates on it and reminders 1 week before and reminders to do the RCs as well. So we have all of those dates in, so we don't scramble at the last second to cut a release.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe I should add the calendar thing to the HIP as the reference implementation section.
That sounds like a good idea. I think the maintainers need to be subscribed to that and reminded, because if I'm not reminded, I'm screwed.
Yeah,
I'll forget.
good point.
And with regards to the actual date, I think that lines up quite nicely with everyone here. I'm assuming that a large portion of the core maintainers are probably going to go on vacation at some point during December, returning either January 1st, January 4th, or something along those lines. So that gives us a period of 1 to 2 weeks after everyone gets back from vacation to start talking and planning about last things that need to go into the next release. So
The thing is, now you bring up the RCs. If we plan for January 13th, does that give us enough headway for the RCs?
We can get an RC the week before and we'll be okay. That when we were originally planning the 13th as the date, I went and looked at those things to see.
Okay.
And at least I should be around with enough time to cut the RCs and not have a problem with that.
Okay, but you get an RC 1 week before. If you get surprises, the RC is no good. You need a second RC, and then the release is delayed. Which maybe that's fine, but
yeah, that to me that's considered acceptable. If everything's going as scheduled, an RC should be able to be 1 week prior, and you should be able to do like a follow-up RC on that week if need be. If you're finding multiple different regressions, you're finding multiple issues, and that is warranting of doing a delay of a release for another week or so. And I think that's more than fair to accommodate people.
And it's probably okay for us to do the release, not so much on the Wednesday before, a week before, but we could actually do it a couple days before that and let it soak for a little longer just in case. So like in this case, if we did the RC on like January 4th, that may be acceptable. And give us a little more soak time on it. And if we know when they're coming out and they're coming out regularly and they're more predictable, folks will probably be okay with that. I would be.
okay, perfect. I'll update the HIP2 for the calendar and then see what I can do or ask somebody's help for creating one.
I can help you with that kind of thing. I've set them up for Kubernetes and stuff before, so.
Perfect.
Okay. So, all right, we've come to your destruction topic, Vic. So Helm charts repo switch over timeline. So we touched on this just a little bit earlier, but just to revisit the conversation, do you want to recap what you want to discuss on this particular topic?
Yeah, yeah. This is, I think, a carryover from last week's notes, but there's really a broader topic that we just need to settle on. We had comms last week about the chart move over, but no discussion in there about deprecation timeline, that it's an archive, like none of that was brought up. And if we turn off the spigot on the actual GitHub repo, then that is essentially an archive of what was there. So I want to make sure we're still going to stop accepting new PRs and archive the charts repo. Is that still the plan of record? And is everybody agreed on that? And if so, I would behoove us to message very, very clearly. The blog as written right now that Farina has is really about URL switchovers in Helm and like these patch releases, but that's not the main message that we need to get out there if we're really going to turn it off. So I want to make sure we're in line.
Yeah, I updated it and I added a section above talking about how you handle anything in there. It's an important note that tells you the cutoff date and it uses the word archive. I did add that to it because you brought that point up, which is a good point. I didn't put it right at the start, but I did put it in above the fold section.
Yeah. I think like even just the title of the blog post is new home for stable and incubator charts.
Yeah.
Which is not. I don't know. You folks can tell me. Are we still on track to turn it down in less than a month? If so, we should not go out and say there's a new home. We should say we're in archive mode in a week, and you need to find something else to do other than switch the URLs. The URLs are only going to work for you for old archive charts, right?
Yeah. That's a good point. So it becomes, how do we message all of these different things? I think we need to have a series of posts and consistent messaging going out constantly over the next month, over every possible channel we can, mailing lists, Twitter, blog posts, any newsletters, anything like that we can. We need to have a consistent message that things are going to, for both chart consumers and chart producers. Okay, chart consumers, they need to know things are moving to a new home, and how to find. So that there's two things. There's one. There is I rely on this today, and I need to just switch right to the new location. And then there is my chart's going to be archived. I need to find the new home to where that's at to continue on. All right, and that. So there's that problem, right? So there's I just need to switch, and then there's I need to switch get my charts from another place, and then there is I'm a chart producer, and either my stuff's in a new home already, which is about half the charts, or it's not a new home, and I need explicit instructions on how I can go about doing that, so we make it easy. They don't have to think, and they can just make the move. And I think we need to do all of this and just start getting a barrage of information out there over the next month or so. The first blog post I wrote dealt with, and some folks have read it, but it basically says, here's how you switch your stable and incubator to the new location. And the details on that with a note about the deprecation. I'm not sure how to fit the deprecation in otherwise, but I think we need to have a bunch more posts and information on this. Bridget, you had something to say.
It sounds like, since you allude to like two different populations, the people who want to put new info in those repos and the people who just want to consume those repos or their moral equivalent.
Yes.
And we're currently putting a message out there that explains to people how to keep consuming those repos or their moral equivalent. But it sounds like what we need is to make sure that as anyone tries to update things, we explain it to them. Because I feel like we might not be able to get everyone to update everything up in front of an archive, right? Like we might just have to say to people when they roll in 3 months from now and say, we would like to change this thing in our stable chart. And then we're like, yeah, so as posted here, please do this. But if they haven't rolled in and made any changes anyway, then it isn't really going to hurt the population that's pulling their thing from the stable archive. They'll just keep pulling it until they come to update it, right?
Yeah, I think there's a gradient that we can do to make it as soft as possible, but we also kind of have to have the rip the Band-Aid off moment, where we're saying like concretely, this is an archived repo. Like you won't be able to update it in all of the community. Like if you ever talk about it, you talk about it as an archive. Otherwise, like people just keep going down the road with us, and we can't support that.
Yeah, but so I agree with Bridget there. You're going to need possibly going to need a two-phased approach, because I suppose the concept was good and the idea was good back last year, when the idea of everyone needs to host their own chart somewhere else. Here's the steps started going out for that. But I suppose the reality is we've come to November now, and there's an X percentage have been moved, but there's that Y left. And the point with it is that no, we're also changing the repo over. And I suppose maybe what Bridge is saying there is that maybe you do the change over the repo first. It's hosted for a certain amount of period on charts or whatever. There's also potentially the redirection from the old Google URL, if that's possible. And then maybe once that settles down, then another approach to deprecate off all those charts from the maintainers or the consumers of those charts, or sorry, the maintainers of those charts. So maybe it has to be done that way, because what you're saying here is it's two big messages that are going to get lost in each other potentially.
But we still have to have a practical plan to get here, right? We have a plan of record. It's actually been voted on in certain places. So we can't just, in a call like this, change our minds. We actually have to go through the governance and do voting, right? The current changes are the stable and incubator Helm repositories are moving over to GitHub pages, and the charts repository that has the stable, the charts Git repository is going to go into, and the language has been used different ways. It's basically going to be deprecated, go into an obsolete mode, right? And so we have two things to plan here. One is the changeover, and the second is how do we handle the obsolescence? And they just happen to be happening at the same time. The obsolescence was announced in 2019, and it's been announced all over the place. And so the question is, do we rip off the Band-Aid, or do we say, you know what, because there's a bunch who haven't, maybe we extend the window like 3 months, and in doing so, we have certain people sign up for an effort to try to move it off, these other folks off in 3 months? Or do we just leave it as is and give them instructions on what to do in the obsolescence? When we do mark it as obsolete, I'm going to suggest a couple of things. First, we're obviously going to turn off CI that creates the Helm repository for these things. We turn off all CI. And I think, and that last commit that turns it off, it also goes through each chart and marks it as this is archived. And in the docs, in the notes everywhere, on each of those charts that is still not deprecated already, it says this is an archived version. So anybody who goes to install it will now see that this is an archived version of it, not actively maintained anymore. And so they do get that messaging still. I think these are all things that we need to do. The question is, for us, do we extend the window to turn it down or not? And I don't have a strong opinion on that because we have to rip off the Band-Aid at some point.
I think that's a question that's better set for the chart maintainers themselves, because they're the ones who are on the hook for that, right? Yourself included, because you're a chart maintainer. I wouldn't want to be imposing as a core maintainer what the chart maintainers want to do, or where their comfort level is. So I think that's a better question to be posed over to, say, Scott and to Reinhardt and everyone else.
So Vic asked a question in chat here. Should we put a vote on the list? I think the answer to that is yes. On the charts maintainers list, we do a vote over there, and we bring it to folks over there to get input. The other thing that I'm curious of is we've got several people who aren't maintainers on the call here today. I'm actually curious what y'all think about this kind of thing, since you get a chance to have your voice. And I see Dan raised his hand. So Dan, what do you think?
I actually wasn't listening. I was getting an angry message from my Slack, and then I just heard that there were several non-maintainers, and I was like, "Hey, they're talking about me." So now I feel
yeah, we okay. The question was just if y'all had any opinions on whether the charts are being deprecated, like they're going to be in an archive state on November 13th, if we should extend that window a little longer or keep it as is. And we are looking for feedback or input.
Oh, so I kind of feel like it would be great if extending it doesn't necessarily help. What I would love is if we can make sure that there are like messages showing up. And so one of the things I talked about with, I remember who it was, but we were talking about how like not every chart is marked as deprecated. So when you pull a chart, it doesn't always show up that it's deprecated, I believe. And so like anything we can do to like just make it more in people's faces if they're trying to do something and they're like, because there are a lot of tutorials out there that are like, oh, now add the main chart repository and then do this. And so if when they try to do that stuff, that they get messages that are like, this is deprecated, don't do this. This is going away. This isn't going to be future available. Like you need to look for this somewhere else. I think that's probably more critical.
Should we do something where we go through all of the non-deprecated charts in Stable and Incubator and add a warning at the top in the README that on a certain date it will be archived? And we could do that now, and then everybody who installs them sees it'll be archived, and then we could direct them to some place like the Artifact Hub and say, go over here if you try to find a future version of it.
I think that's a great idea. Sorry if I muddied the water with what I said earlier, but I think if you can get that across to people so they know is probably the most important thing. Thanks.
Yeah,
Okay.
Matt.
We'll take this over to chart maintainers. I know
I think
Fisher
that's a great
has to
idea
make
as
sure we
well.
find people for the truth.
Yeah, and then also if there are further follow-up or things that we want to get feedback, perhaps the Helm users mailing list, if you want to start asking the community about their feelings and thoughts about this kind of move, that's also another good avenue for getting that information out. So we have 2 or 3 more action items on here, but we're at 9:57. So I think we should. Oh, did we? Was there already an offs like? It looks like Adam and Bridget have already volunteered for moderator and notes next week. Do we have someone who is happy to do issue triage for the next week? I can volunteer myself, but if anyone else wants to come join me, I'd be happy to have anyone else join the issue triage team. Nope. Okay. Okay, moving on from that discussion item. So I think we've gotten that discussion well done. We can follow up and do more action items on that offline. We have, Martin, you have your lint warning with no templates directory. Should this be removed as you don't need it for a valid chart reference? Do you think you can time box that in 2 minutes time, or do you think we need to punt that for next week?
I'd say about 45 seconds.
Okay.
Give or take. This is about, we have a message at the moment when you go linting, it's put a warning in to say a chart has no templates directory, but a chart can be valid without a templates directory. And the OP wants to know why we're putting a warning out to say there's no templates directory. Should it be removed? Yes or no?
So it's optional, and it makes sense for it to be optional for like a library chart, but for an application chart, are there any practices out there for a chart that would not require any templates to be rendered?
Because the only thing is that you can actually install a chart and it shows no error without a templates directory.
Yeah, but then you fail afterwards because when you're rendering the chart and you're trying to submit it to Kubernetes, it'll say no resources to be created or something like that. So there will be a failure error afterwards. So I think that's what the warning's trying to catch there. When it comes to library charts, because it's all of them are being included as dependencies, that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious on what are the use cases for an application chart without any templates?
Let me ask this. What's the use case for a library chart without anything in the templates directory? What's it going to have?
The only cases that I could ever perceive that is if you wanted to install CRDs or if you wanted to install pre-install hooks and then include that as a dependency to something else.
The CRDs,
Jeez.
That would be one right there.
But I think we actually have a bug actually out there that you can't install CRDs on their own without the templates directory or something like that. I think there's a bug out there on that.
But if you included it as a dependency, then it would be possible, as in like one dependent chart that has the CRDs directory, you include that as a dependency to another chart, and then it would be rendered properly. So I think it's just like a design mismatch here and there more than anything.
Yeah, because you're right. It does put an error out, no objects visited, if you try to install it without templates, because it doesn't make sense.
I think this needs a little bit more thought. So maybe it's probably best to, what do you think about punting this off to the actual PR to have a further follow-up discussion? I can probably weigh in on this a little bit too.
Yeah, it's not a PR, it's an actual, it's still at an issue. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see also wanting to do things like maybe ship like CA certs that could be like in files that would be added to charts, and or even things to be run through the post render hook.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but then we're really getting outside the core use case of Helm. So we should rethink this.
Exactly.
We're going for these exceptional 5%, but it hurts the majority in catching bugs and issues. We should definitely dig into it, because if it's just throw assets into a package so you can run through post render hook, we've kind of gone pretty far off of the core of what a chart is.
Yeah, and it is just a warning. It's not an error either. So.
Okay, let's follow up in the issue and see if we can add some more feedback to that one. But that should give us a little bit more way to move this forward.
Okay.
So we're 2 minutes over now. So we have two discussion items, and thank you to whoever's doing notes today. I think it's Martin for punching the next action items over to the next week. So with that, we'll go and discuss them next week, and we'll see you all then. Thanks everyone for attending.
Bye.